Pulling back from the big picture for a moment, I was wondering if you could actually give us your take on this notion of frictionless commerce. I mean, what do we essentially mean by this?
I like it. What do we say? What do you mean by frictionless commerce? Is what you're asking.
Yes,
I think that's a very fair question. Let's break it down into constituent parts. So let's talk about commerce for a start. I think it's fair to say it's a bit of agonising over this term. Well, so let me clearly state here that when we say commerce, that does not mean necessarily transactions in a purely commercial sense.
Mm-hmm.
Although, of course, we encourage solutions and proposals that do look at commercial transactions. So what we mean there, and I've used the word already, but what we're really looking at is this whole notion of transactions. I think broadly defining transactions as, I have a thing, you want that thing, you get the thing from me through whatever means and
indeed, and of course,
with whatever
yes,
exchange.
Absolutely. Of course, transaction is a core theme within the creative industry strategy to be published by the technology.
That's
strategy.
right. It is, yeah. So, that's the most basic form of transaction. But plainly, in the digital realm, transactions become more and more complex. I have a thing or a service. Someone else wants that service or a thing.
Absolutely.
You build a whole other service on that in order to pass that on, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So that's really what we're meaning by commerce here. The simple act of transactions in the digital space. By friction, we simply mean things which get in the way of those transactions happening smoothly. So, by definition, an environment which has frictionless commerce has more transactions take place in a much smoother way for all the participants involved.
Same. I mean, I think as well, it goes without saying that through this competition, the Technology Strategy Board is giving successful applicants the opportunity and space to really work through some of the innovation barriers to frictionless commerce. I wondered if you could give us, again, your take on what you consider these barriers to be.
Okay, so I think a clear phrase in there is my take, because, again, I'm going to caveat this with really not wanting to prescribe too clearly any particular solutions that we're looking for. But I guess what you're really asking me to do is give some examples of, when we've talked about frictionless commerce, you're asking me really to define what some of the friction is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go through some of the ones which are quite well rehearsed already, but potentially outdated and ill fit for purpose intellectual property laws, particularly around copyright.
Mm-hmm.
Poor standards of metadata and poor metadata interoperability. I've been working now with the KTM for 3 years, and principally what I've been looking at over that period has been many funding calls and competitions specifically around metadata, and I do think that this particular call really should build on that work. But beyond purely the metadata, at the level of the assets themselves, the digital assets, the digital content, whatever you want to call it, we still have real problems around, again, interoperability, poor standardization. That's only made worse by the proliferation of devices. So, these are some of the kinds of things. So some of them are, if you like, legal or strategic. Some of them are more deeply technical that I think are in the way of things running as smoothly as they might in the digital marketplace. But I really do want to again repeat that caveat that these are. I hope these are examples which give people a sense of what we're thinking here. But we do not want to ask people, come up with solutions to these 4 questions, please. Thank you. We're very, very much encouraging a more broad-minded response to this. The last thing to say on it, really, on that, is that the advent of digital has come with an incredible opportunity. So if this seems like a little bit of carping on the sidelines of that, then it needs to be restated. There are huge opportunities there. In a sense, this is really working with those opportunities and releasing them where they've got snagged on stuff, which is just the result of legacy systems and legacy legal environments and regulatory frameworks.
Okay, I mean, yeah, that's fascinating stuff. I mean, I think we're starting to wrap up here now. Could we say then, really, that given a lot of the kind of points that you've raised about kind of flow of stuff and content and data, etc., are we really kind of concluding that the kind of hub of this competition is really about creating an environment where businesses can think strategically about how their digital assets even can flow in a B2B sense, in a way in which both the IP is respected and cash is allowed to flow fairly between them, down along the value chain?
Yes and no.
I knew you.
So I think, I seem to have said the word caveat several times here, but I'm going to throw out at least 2 or 3 in response to that. So one is to say, yes, we are certainly looking, if you like, at the level of the broader environment or ecosystem, at technologies, but also, as you put it, strategic approaches, which simply ease transaction. One of the results of that will be, as I think you eloquently put it, cash flowing around more easily.
Thank you.
But it's a pleasure. But that's not necessarily all that we're looking for. It's a very important component. But again, I said earlier, we're not just talking about commercial environments. Certainly, the respecting of intellectual property, like the respecting, frankly, of any property, is extremely important to us. But as I've already said, there is some thinking that some of our frameworks around intellectual property are not necessarily fit for purpose, at the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century. It may well be that some of the solutions proposed in response to this competition look to some degree at those, the legal framework there being rethought. And I think lastly, my last caveat, I promise you, is again around this notion of the digital asset or content, or a piece of stuff.
That's clearly important.
I think it's very, very important, but it's also important to recognise that we might not simply be talking about assets, we might be talking about digital services as well. We might be talking about services which are actually provided offline entirely, but where the transactions that support those services, or goods for that matter, the transactions which support them are digital. So, I realise that many of my responses in this interview have possibly been to widen things out from a very tight scope. But I think the broader the set of responses we can have to this call, and the broader the set of sectors and businesses that are able to respond to it, the better.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I think yes, that's our job really, to narrow down the scope, and then we put it in the hands of business to take us on the journey. But thank you very much for coming in today, Simon. You've certainly kind of furthered my knowledge of this kind of, the opportunities and challenges attached to this very exciting funding programme, and I'm sure you have kind of enlightened many of our viewers today. Thank you.
I hope so. All right, thank you.